So I will tell you a little bit about, thank you, the research going on in our lab on misinformation. Alessandro Flamini is my main collaborator, but there are many others, colleagues here, and postdocs and students doing great work in this area. I don't need to convince you that every day we see a lot of misinformation everywhere, including in social media. We may read that Obama is a Muslim, or that vaccines cause autism, or that our own research program is a secret government conspiracy to suspend conservative Twitter accounts. You may have read about that. It turns out that when you look at the data, this kind of misinformation is just as likely to go viral as reliable information written by bona fide journalists who actually check their sources. And in fact, this plot here is what is in this article that the dean this morning was mentioning, that is in the cover feature of this week's issue of The Economist. It's an article about post-truth. So what is a world in which truth really doesn't matter? It's kind of scary. So I'll tell you a little bit about our work in different areas. The first one is detection of information. So we got interested in this problem by looking at diffusion networks in social media. These are networks where the nodes are people, and links, connections between nodes, represent how a piece of information could be a hashtag, a phrase, a link to a news article, spreads from person to person. For example, from retweets, Facebook shares, mentions, and so on. And when you look at this structure, it is somewhat revealing. When you look at organic grassroots conversation, they look like some of these examples at the top, but then sometimes you see weird stuff, like two nodes that exchange thousands and thousands of messages with each other. And what it is, this is trying to manipulate public opinion on social media. These are examples of AstroTurf, or groups of accounts, sometimes very large, that collude together. They're all controlled by a single person or a single entity, sometimes via software, so we call them social bots, to make it look like somebody's popular, or to make it look like a lot of people are saying something bad about someone, or spreading all kind of information or misinformation. So we've used machine learning algorithms, leveraging features extracted from the structure of these networks, and that has been successful in distinguishing between normal grassroots communication and AstroTurf. A related problem that we've been working on with some success is that of distinguishing between accounts on social media that are controlled by humans, real people, versus accounts that are controlled by social bots, software. So we have some tools that are publicly available with APIs that work quite well. And in fact, this work has been featured recently on the covers of CACM and IEEE Computer. So in addition to these tools, we have other tools that anybody, including reporters, social scientists, but also the general public, can use to visualize trends, to visualize networks, diffusion networks of various types of memes, geographic spread, and so on. This is on a system that we call the Observatory on Social Media, or AWESOME for short. So please check it out. And we make the data available through APIs. This is a very large collection of about 70 billion tweets that we've been collecting from Twitter over the last several years. So we're trying to make this data as useful as possible to all researchers, compatible with the Twitter Terms of Service. I'll say a little bit about the work that we're doing on trying to understand how misinformation spread. So the types of questions that we're exploring here are, what is the role of online social networks and social media in fostering things like echo chambers, bubbles, segregation, polarization, radicalization? These are all things that you read about in the news every day, and we're beginning to understand some factors. So here, for example, are some pictures that show you how polarized we are, how segregated we are when we talk about politics on Twitter, for example. So we're using models to try and understand what are the factors that make us vulnerable to misinformation. For example, models of this kind tell us that if you live in a segregated community, you're more vulnerable to the spread of misinformation. Or we have models to look at the factors that make the network efficient or less efficient in allowing good information, reliable information, to become popular, and not vice versa. And it turns out that when you mine empirical data from social media about, for example, how harsh is the competition for our attention, because information overload, and also how limited our attention is, how many things we're likely to look before we decide to share something, these models predict that the model is very inefficient. That helps us understand why misinformation spreads so virally. And lastly, I'll take 30 seconds just to say that some of our research is also about thinking of ways to mitigate the spread of misinformation. We have several projects in this area. I'll just mention one. We're beginning to think about computational fact-checking. Can we, for example, extract things like that sentence at the top, Sylvester wants to eat Tweety, from social media, and then compare it using network analytics tools with knowledge network that we have available, such as DBpedia, which is extracted from Wikipedia, and try to say something about the trustworthiness of that piece of information. So this is a new but very exciting area of research. So thank you very much, and I also want to thank all the many collaborators in the center and our group and students and so on. So that concludes the part of this session where we're presenting work within the school.